it's Friday, which means it's time once again for the best movie podcast ever. I'm laughing for a reason you don't understand, and I'm not going to let you in on that, Joe. This is the only movie podcast that offers objective and hyperbole-free discussion of every movie in the known universe. I am your host, the podcaster with no name, Konrad, and with me as always, shooting at the walls of heartbreak, he is a warrior, it's Anthony James.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Hello, Konrad. How are you today?
I'm very well. I managed to. I'll be honest. Normally, I have those little. I don't know what you call it, like an intro quote for you. Yeah. I have them pre-written. Pre-written. Yep. Pre-written. I have them pre-written. Oh, I've got a cat. Pre-written well in advance, but I forgot to do it for this one, so I had to do that like 10 minutes before we started recording. So I just used the lyrics from a very good song. Nothing to do with movies.
Absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine with me. You don't have to have any movies at all. In fact, are we talking about a movie this week, or
we are?
We are.
We are talking about people shooting at each other. It doesn't really happen in this movie, but people fight, and that's tangentially related to the idea of being a warrior. We're here to talk about Ridley Scott's The Last Duel, the good movie that he made in 2021.
Yes, that's right, actually, because he released two within a month, didn't he? The other one was the Lady Gaga. What's his name? Jared Leto film. You know, the Jared Leto vehicle.
Yeah. The Uncle Gucci movie or whatever. Like, I can't remember what's his name. Paolo.
Before we go in, Konrad, did you know that I think Mark Kermode, the British film reviewer, must have predicted that? Like, I'm assuming he hated it, but he must have predicted that Paolo Gucci was going to earn Jared Leto a nomination, and he got like a Screen Actors Guild nomination or something like that.
I saw it was in all the like the trades the other week, like Variety and Hollywood Reporter and Deadline. They're all like, he's got a SAG nomination and well deserved, and it was like, this is outrageous.
Exactly.
It's like they don't pay attention to the people who are arguing that it's just the most acting is what gets awards rather than like good acting. It's like Leonardo DiCaprio went and lived in a cave with a bear for 2 years when he was making The Revenant. That deserves an award. And I don't mean to come after Leo. Leo's a very good actor, but that's the kind of thing that gets like attention for awards rather than like any kind of subtle performance. And as if we needed more proof, Jared Leto getting a nomination.
Paolo Gucci.
It's just like there's no subtlety to it. But anyway, we'll talk about it. We're going to get into it. But like, without further ado, let's talk about some gosh darn movies.
Let's do it.
Movies. Ridley Scott ones, to be precise. He made two of them last year. This actually, to be honest, this joke that I have pre-written and I'm going to read out more or less verbatim doesn't really work now because we've already talked about House of Gucci. So you've kind of blown up my spot here a little bit, but I'm going to persevere with it.
Yeah, because
I'm a pro, and we're just going to carry on
You're
regardless.
A pro. Yeah.
So, begin joke. The open parentheses. Here is joke. One of them, Ridley Scott made two movies this year. One of them was a soaring example of layered performances in a richly developed period setting, and the other was The Last Duel. There you go. That's a joke. House of Gucci is a bad movie. So,
yes, it is.
It's a weird. It's like the duality of man. Ridley Scott's 2021.
The last duality of man.
It was very good. It was made for Disney. And was definitely, I don't think there's any argument, or, well, maybe you'll have a different opinion on this. I'll be interested to hear your take on it. But to my mind, I don't think there's much argument that The Last Duel is the better of the two films that Ridley Scott's made last year.
No arguments here. Okay,
but so some people apparently disagree with that, because if you look at the figures...
of course.
This has become, to my mind, The Last Duel, that is, has become the latest in the rich tradition of Ridley Scott movies that are actually really good films, but have become complete box office flops. So, obviously, I don't think Last Duel was helped by being more of a Disney Plus straight-to-streaming release.
Literally within a month, it was on streaming services.
Yeah, so this it does but I mean that speaks potentially to Disney's faith in it. Well, I guess. That's a slightly cynical way of looking at it, because you could say they're sticking Pixar movies straight to streaming because they want people to get Disney Plus. And
well,
happy to
yes,
take the
I think
shit.
personally as well, Conrad, I also researched it a little bit, and apparently, because I was thinking about Ridley Scott, and this is a good film, and I understand why he was annoyed people didn't go see it. I understand that. Throwing accusations on, younger generations.
Yeah,
looking at
we were
phones.
all on our phones, and
Yeah.
I say we because I am still a millennial. You can't get rid of me that easily.
He tweeted that on a phone, though. I think so. It's a bit of a moot point. But I looked it up, and apparently that whenever Disney acquired Fox, this film came with it, right?
Okay.
And this was one of the hangers-on from the old Fox regime that Disney just saw out contractually. So I would imagine Disney wasn't very hot on this one.
Yeah, they didn't necessarily see this bringing in subs. They just didn't have the faith to put a big marketing push behind it and put it out in cinemas. Which is a shame because, as I say, in cinemas for the 36 hours that it was actually available to watch in cinemas, it made that I've clearly just influenced the number of hours I picked there by reading the figure that I was about to say, because the figure it made was 30.6 million worldwide at the at the box office. That's compared to House of Gucci's 145.
Is that the opening weekend, or is that overall?
No, that's gross so far. So it really didn't make very much money in the box office.
That's surprising that is so low. But I imagine it was a weird moment. Right, I think that Spider-Man got everyone back to the cinema.
Yes.
I think pandemic movies can be viewed pre-Spider-Man and post-Spider-Man, and I think that it makes sense in a way. But 30 years seems quite low, and maybe it's because there was no advertising for it.
Well, I mean, it was not in cinemas for very long at all. It was literally. I wanted to go and see it, but by the time I'd heard that it had been released, I wasn't like actively looking for it. I was waiting to see like an advert for it or something. And by the time I'd heard it was released, it was already not in cinemas anymore. So it was a real blink and you'll miss it kind of release. And that no doubt hurt its ability to draw.
Well, there's been no sort of buzz around it in terms of negativity, though. When I like. It is strange that it's made so. It is far better than House of Gucci. I suppose it doesn't have the same mainstream appeal as House of Gucci in terms of name brand value, but it is surprising. Definitely, it is strange as well that it came out a month after House of Gucci, whenever they both were directed by Ridley Scott and both starred Adam Driver. Very strange.
Yes, it is weird. I mean, I guess he had Adam Driver there, and he was bringing back and forth between the two sets. And just like that's actually not true. It finished filming this. I think they filmed it in like 2019 or something, and they would there was some kind of delays, probably to do with the Disney acquisition of Fox actually, that stopped it from coming out. But this one's been done for a while. So okay, let's talk about it then. So it's Last Duel, 2021 movie. It's directed by Ridley Scott, written by the dream team of Good Will Hunting Oscar winners, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck.
The only film they've written together since Good Will Hunting, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, and there's actually a very interesting thing about the way this is written. So they wrote the first two acts, which I'll explain in a second. The third act was written by a writer I've not heard of before, but Nicole Holofcener, who took charge of writing the female character's perspective, which I think was a really interesting way to split up the writing duties. And essentially, The Last Duel tells the story of a knight called Jean de Carouge. I really get to lean into my French accent here. Jean de Carouge.
A true story as well, it's worth saying.
It is, yes. And Squire Jacques Legris, they basically fight a duel to the death. The last judicial duel fought in France over a claim.
According to, I think apparently there was one like 200 years later, but it's one of the final.
Well, that one wasn't a judicial duel.
That might,
so basically, the distinction is that the winner of this duel was
innocent
determined to be innocent or guilty of the crime based on the outcome of the duel, whereas the later duels were just like, I don't like you, I'm gonna fucking kill you, kind of thing. But so there is a claim that Legris raped Carouge's wife Marguerite, and this is essentially told from the perspective of all three individuals over 3 acts, 3 points of view chapters in a story spanning multiple years. So I will say, just to get out ahead of it as a content warning to anyone who's may be sensitive to this stuff, we're going to have to talk about sexual assault and rape in this because it is central to the story. So just be warned that we're going to talk about that. So the book that this is based on is called The Last Duel, a true story of trial by combat in medieval France by Eric. I'm going to say Jaeger, or I don't think it's Jaeger. That doesn't sound like a real name to me.
Jaeger.
Jaeger, perhaps. But yeah, so it's about the last judicial duel fought in France. So it is a true story, and Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's parts of the screenplay draw directly from the facts of that. Obviously, they tarse it up a little bit to make a movie out of it. The third act is entirely fictional. And I feel like that kind of thematically works quite well because women didn't get to write accounts of their events back in medieval France.
In fact, I wasn't expecting it to happen because of that. I thought that they wouldn't do that because certain aspects of the Legree storyline felt already harsh enough, and then whenever it actually came to the female's perspective, I was like, oh, yeah, this is really, really, really well done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first things first. Then, did you know anything about this kind of like interesting plot structure going into the movie?
No, I knew nothing. All I knew that there was going to be a duel, which was considered the last. I knew nothing about this movie except for that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck wrote it. In fact, I didn't even know. I think the last time I saw about this movie was back whenever Ben Affleck was still cast as Legree himself, and then they had to change because of scheduling conflicts. So I honestly didn't even know going into this that Ben Affleck wasn't going to be a big role in it. So I was really surprised at how much I liked this movie, to be honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's... I absolutely was as well. I went in, as I do with most Ridley Scott movies, being like, I love some Ridley Scott movies, but I feel like he's a director who, in the past 20 years, has really struggled to recapture his top form. And this, I think, is approaching it. So, I mean, it's essentially kind of like a Rashomon style thing, like 3 different people telling their version of events.
Yes.
I think the distinction between the Kurosawa movie Rashomon and this one is that with Rashomon, it kind of plays with the idea of who's telling the truth, what it interrogates the nature of truth and how our own perception of events is coloured by who we are. In this, it's very clear who's telling the truth, and I think that's a good decision.
But the thing is, I'm going to be really controversial. Maybe I think they're all telling the truth, but there is only one truth. They all think they are telling the truth. It's the perspective of each. That's the conversation I was having with my wife throughout this film, because obviously there's a lot of stuff that's been going on in the world recently, in recent years, especially here in Ireland. There has been a woman who has been murdered in the last few weeks, which has been big news and sparked a lot of debate about how we can sort of move forward as a society and stop this from happening, this abuse. Now, it's interesting that it's interesting that Adam Driver's character Legree never believed to the point in which the film concludes, never believed that he did anything wrong, and I think that is because he truly believed that, and that's one of the main problems with even today. Like, this is 700 years ago, and I'm sitting there thinking this is exactly the same as what happens still today. And I think that's why this film was made. It makes sense to me, and that's one thing I think. It's perspectives of the characters. Now, we all sit here knowing what happened, but their perspectives is what's interesting to me, the way it's been put across. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really astute point. I think, let's just say we're going to get into spoilers straight off, because we have to kind of talk about the end of this. So
yes, exactly.
To that point, there's a moment at the end of this film, seconds before the duel finishes, where Adam Driver's character Legree kind of, in desperation, cries out that he swears to God that he never raped anyone, and I do believe his character believes that,
but he's wrong
when he says it. He is wrong, yeah. But I think that's a really astute observation. That I think it's not as simple as the rapist realizes he was wrong, is punished, and everyone goes on with their lives. It's often a lot more insidious than that. It requires a level of introspection that Legree simply doesn't have.
Yes, and that's why I mean that I was fearing being controversial, because when you say he thought he didn't do it, that doesn't mean that he isn't a rapist, and that doesn't mean that he has no blame. Even if the problem is with education and not knowing what consent is and all that sort of thing, he still did a horrible thing.
Yeah.
He still is an evil, I don't know what that means, but he still is an abhorrent man who did an abhorrent act, who deserved. Now, the justice he got in this, obviously, we don't want that to happen these days. But he deserves to be brought to justice. In whatever form that takes. So I think that's what I meant by it being controversial. What I was saying, because it's his perspective, and I fear that some people would say, yeah, he didn't know. He wasn't taught. It's the Middle Age. It's medieval times. This has clearly been made as an allegory for real life today as well.
Yeah.
So the idea is that yes, we need to teach consent. Yes, we need to educate. But the thing is, you still have to be held to justice because of what you did,
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you might believe with every fiber of your being that what you did was consensual and within the letter of the law. That doesn't make it so. Like,
exactly.
if you misunderstand consent and fuck up as a result, then sorry, but you gotta pay the piper.
And again, I don't want to trivialize sexual assault, because obviously, it's a whole power dynamic that has been bred through the society. But like any other crime, like, you think about it, if you accidentally, made a mistake in the car and killed someone, you can't sit there and say, "Oh, I didn't mean it. I didn't know what I was doing." Why is it just with sexual assault that these conversations happen?
Yeah, well, I think it's because there's that grey area of like, or it's not a grey area at all. Like, there's yes and there's no. It's very binary. Yeah. But there has for a long time been a perceived grey area, where like, maybe someone was saying no, but you could say, oh, they actually wanted it, and all that kind of nonsense, and that was accepted as a reasonable defense for why you did something. Unfortunately, we're getting to a point in society where we can just say, no, actually, no, that's not okay. Like, if someone says no, you leave them alone.
Yeah, and I honestly I thought this film was going to end with Legree winning, because. Good thing. Obviously, it happened historically the way it happened, but I honestly thought this is going to be really, sickening. Yeah. It's going to be really sick. He's going to win, and then she's going to be burnt. And I honestly thought it was going to be a real sickening ending like that, but thankfully it wasn't. Having said that, though, there's a real sort of melancholic feel to the end whenever like she gets justice, but it's not really her. It's Matt Damon's character, Jean, who is, because she's his property.
Yeah,
and
he has to be reminded at the end to, like, as
go to his wife. Yeah,
Carouge wins and is celebrating his victory, and he has to be reminded by the King of France that his wife is sat behind him, chained to a pyre that she was going to be burned on if he had lost the duel, and that this is all about her. Absolutely, it's very bittersweet,
and even it shows a picture of it shows the crowd with some women who seem like really empowered by the fact that she got justice, but that's melancholic to me as well, because this is especially this is a time where power matters, and these sort of poor people are not going to be able to do anything about it, and that is just like today as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely a mirror of the power dynamics that still exist in society to this day, I think. So I think Scott had a very difficult, probably more Affleck, Damon, and Holocenner actually had a difficult balancing act to perform in the screenplay when you're dealing with subject matter that serious. To keep things kind of moving and entertaining, and I am interested because this is, it's not that long a movie, but you're essentially telling the same story 3 times. And when you sort of tell someone who hasn't seen this, perhaps, like, oh, it tells the story of a woman being raped and the subsequent duel for her and her family's honor, I guess, that occurs as a result of that. That's a tough sell. That sounds like it's going to be a rough watch. Then when you say the story is told 3 times from 3 different perspectives, it's like, oh, that sounds like it's not going to be any fun. Yeah. And certainly those parts of it aren't fun, and you shouldn't be coming to this movie if you want that bit to be fun, or if you want to have fun. But the way they structure it, I think, is really clever, because they start with Carouge, who's like this, he sees himself as this like valorous noble man, and which is really funny when you then see how everyone else perceives him for a start.
Yeah, he's a laughing stock.
He is a laughing stock. But they also like you get some really good like battle sequences that just keep things moving, keep the pace going. Real like very violent kind of blood and guts stuff that I really enjoyed. And then you see Legree, who is this kind of charming model noble, and his storyline, rather than having battles, is kind of kept entertaining through his relationship with Ben Affleck, who what a beard
Pierre.
Ben Affleck.
Yeah, I know.
Pierre, bleached blonde hair, chin strap, like they're just carousing and they're romancing women and drinking, and it works on two levels because it's entertaining to watch and it suckers you into the charisma of Legree and the kind of the valor of Komar'S. Like you watch that intro and you're like, oh, Legree is a piece of shit because Komar'S is like this, and then it there's the pullback where it's like, oh no, he actually isn't like that, and you finally get to Jodie Comer as Marguerite's chapter.
Well, even before that, Connor, I do want to step in there. In Legree's storyline, when he actually gets to the point where he commits the act.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Even the way they put it in his perspective, it was so clearly a rape that there was no question about it. For me, anyway. So maybe the first 80% of his storyline, you're sort of along with him there, Yeah. And I was questioning as well the whole time. I was questioning the whole time. Oh, I honestly thought like one of the perspectives was going to be consensual. And the fact that it wasn't was so interesting to me and so realistic, because it's all about the perspectives of the people in the scenario. Yeah. Like Legree doesn't think it happened any different, but he doesn't know what he did because he has had power his whole life and because he exploits that power.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's fascinating to see the two sides of it. So from Legree's perspective, it's not presented as sinister that you burst into a woman's home when she's alone with your friend who basically stands at the door, pretends to be someone else, and when she opens the door, you burst in. That
must be because like the idea of a noble man coming to the door, you would never let them in, but the fact that it was a sort of more of a commoner means that she feels like maybe, I don't know, is no danger to me? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean I just think it is fascinating how it's clearly very sinister, even though it's not presented as sinister. And his pursuit of her when he's in the house is very like, oh, she's saying no, but really she means yes, and it's like, oh, this is not okay.
She was screaming for people.
Yeah. And then obviously, in her retelling of events, which is very clearly denoted as, so at the beginning of every act says the truth according to Jean de Carouge, the truth according to Jacques Legree, and then for hers it says the truth according to Marguerite, and then Marguerite fades away and it just says the truth, which I think is a smart choice.
Yes.
Because I didn't want the movie to get mired down in, who's telling the truth here? I feel like it has a very clear message about believing victims of abuse. It's very much an allegory for what has gone on that still goes on in the modern day with usually women, but not always, but people who are powerless with those who have power. And I think that was the right choice to just be like, no, we're not getting into who's telling the truth here. We're saying this is the truth.
Because also it is the truth, because if you think about it, the way they put it across was the way that Jean and Legree mostly were perceiving her actions, and it was showing us what she intended with her actions. Like, for example, the moment where she said he was good looking, but she also called him pompous and called him he was up himself. And then the moment where she's dancing with Jean, and then she looks over to him and smiles because she's like, I know how to play the game. We keep the Lord sweet or whatever. In that moment, in his perspective, she was coming onto him, and that's what I've talked about with my wife before. I don't know why, what happens in an upbringing of a man. There's a certain, maybe even women too, but my perspective is from a man. But there's a certain thing in some men that think if a woman is nice to you, it means they're flirting with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to what you said before about the view of sex as a conquest and a relationship as a kind of as a matter of ownership. it's a sort of adversarial relationship, an adversarial relationship to sexual relationships that I think is profoundly unhealthy and belongs in the trash, frankly. But certain people still have it.
But also the idea of, like, you know, that she was his property, John's property. So the idea as well, like, obviously Legree, like the women are viewed as like second class citizens, or like background characters, and like, you know, the man is the main character. And although it is not legal now in our country where we live anyway for women to be the property of men, it still is interesting that the sort of take they're giving is that maybe that's sort of the mindset is still there, that a woman is there to do what you know, you are the main character and she is to do your bidding. And although it's not, people aren't going to really think that A to B. I mean, some people are going to think that in certain corners of the internet, which you should stay away from. But people just like sort of have these natural feelings of power, the power dynamics that are there, and the idea that you know, we talked about it. The idea that they're entitled to this woman's attention, entitled to this woman to do something with them. The fact that they feel that way is actually exactly the same as it was 700 years ago. It's just these days it's not in law, but the dynamic is still there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the positions of power and the type of person who occupies them really hasn't changed that much in the last 800 years. I think it's fair to say. So I think it's worth shouting out Jodie Comer's performance in this. I think Matt Damon and Adam Driver are both great as well. But Jodie Comer really, that third act is a brilliant performance from her, because she is kind of just set dressing in the first two. You know, she's the doting wife who wishes her courageous husband well as he goes off to fight wars, and then she's the flirtatious maiden who Legree pursues, and she's her point of view really isn't captured at all in those first two, because that's how those men see her. And then Jodie Comer and the screenplay from Hall of Senate has a lot of catching up to do to get you to the point it needs you to be really emotionally invested in that duel. You know, you've got 40 minutes or so for Jodie Comer to say, this is actually the truth, this is who I am as a character, this is why you should feel sorry for me, because not just because of the rape, obviously, or not, you shouldn't pity people who are raped, obviously, but like the situation she finds herself in with an evil mother-in-law and an unloving husband, to get all of this stuff in, for it all to feel believable. And I think she absolutely nails it. Like, I don't know about you, you've kind of mentioned it, but during the duel, I was it's probably the most invested in an action sequence I've been for a long time. Like, I was like, I hope Courage wins this. This will be awful if he doesn't.
I'm so happy that I didn't know the historical fact before watching it. And like, let's just talk about how good that duel was, because it needed to be good. Can you imagine if this was like a damp squib and it was like, I don't know, like 5 minutes of like just
Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Darth Vader.
Exactly. Like, it had to be like the best medieval duel we've ever seen. And maybe it isn't the best, but it is one of the best. I thought it was really
pretty
well
damn
done.
good. Pretty damn good. And you know, there's highs, there's lows. It's very dirty and gritty. You know, there's mud everywhere, and people are getting stabbed in the legs, and there's not a lot of like actual violence in it, because it feels like quite a believable duel where you know, you're just punching each other and knocking each other around and stuff. It's and the conclusion is incredibly violent, I will say.
So personal too. Like, that's what I liked about the conclusion. It was so personal, and then the moment after where he doesn't even remember his wife, he has to be reminded. It's like, it was so personal, and then you're like, oh, but it wasn't personal for his wife. He wasn't he was doing this because he was wronged in his mind. You know?
His honor was slighted, so he had to correct it, and he like didn't even believe his wife when she first told him, and seems to treat the fact that he is being put in a position, that he has put himself in a position where she may be burned alive, and he has to fight a duel. He has made all the choices that have led him to that, and he treats it like she has inconvenienced him by being raped, which is just...
let's also talk, this is very subtle here, Konrad, but let's also talk about the fact that they included a scene to point out something to me. And so obviously she wanted to have his children. She wanted to give him an heir. That was her duty, so to speak, at the time. So you couldn't necessarily say that every time she had intercourse with her husband that was sexual assault, right? But there are a few times they show where Jean doesn't come out looking great. So, for example, the moment where she reveals to him in her storyline that happened and that she was raped by Legree, and then he says, "Okay, let's go right now because I'm not going to let him be the last man who had you."
Yeah.
That to me, you cannot convince me that Jean didn't sexually assault rape Marguerite there as well. That is what that is. Now, obviously, I think it wasn't until like the 1980s where it was illegal to for like a rape to occur within a marriage. It's crazy.
It was even later than that. I think it was like 1991 in the UK that was
crazy late. Illegal. So we're talking 700 years ago. So I'm not saying it was illegal, but I'm saying that is the same. Same thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's such a brilliant movie for getting you on board with Jodie Comer's struggles as quickly as possible by, as you say, showing that her romantic relationship with her husband is purely utilitarian. There's no romance there. He doesn't care about her, and a lot of their sexual encounters border on assault because she has no say in it. And I think they do a good job of contextualizing that and saying, well, this is kind of how it was how a sexual relationship was viewed between the man and woman in that day and age. Yeah. But it doesn't make it any better because it's also the movie is also, or the screenplay is clearly approaching these issues with an eye on modern
of course,
moralities. Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And just in case you're listening to this and you haven't seen the movie yet, I will say that there is a sort of happy ending. Like it's the only example I can think of where a sort of not post credits but like a post fight scene exposition card pops up saying, "Oh, and by the way, this character died and she lived happily ever after." Comes up and you're like, "Yes,
yes, get in!"
Fuck off, Carouge. Yeah.
yeah. And I love as well that he went and died in the Crusades as well. Yeah. Like he literally couldn't stop fighting. Like he was always looking for the love of all the men, in his life. He doesn't actually ever try to get the love from his wife. But it was. I'm going to tell you one thing. One negative, right? I really like this film. Don't get me wrong. But one negative, and I don't even think now that I've seen the whole thing it is a negative. But see at the start of the film when I'm watching a medieval film, I love the aesthetic of the 80s and 90s medieval films where there's a lot of color in them. The wee border zoo factor, so to speak, right?
Sure.
And this film was very, like, the way it was graded was very sparse of color.
Yes.
And therefore, like, even like in the opening scene where it's showing the beginning of the duel before it cuts away to the backstories, Carouge is wearing red, Legree's wearing blue, but they almost both look like they're wearing gray, and it's a
very muddy, grim film.
Yeah, there are moments with pops of color, and I understand, like, thematically why they didn't. But I thought I'd mention that when I first started watching it, before I knew even what it was about, I didn't even know that someone was going to get raped in it. I honestly didn't know. So by the time we got there, I was like, okay, I understand now. But until then, I was like, give me a bit of color,
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's very little of the kind of.
It felt too Guy Ritchie to me.
Yeah, I can see that. I think I wonder though if you had, I suppose they'd have probably fit in the first telling Carouge's because he sees himself as this chivalric noble warrior. I wonder if they'd have actually changed the way it looked to have the colours lightened up and make his story seem brighter because that's how he sees himself. Whether that would have been a little bit too on the nose, I don't know. I'd have to see it, but I know what you mean. Like, it is a very grim movie to look at.
The color palette it matches the theme, which is good. It's a film. It's a film, and it's allowed to have its own theme. It's just that when I first watched it, before I even know what it was about, I was like, I long for the Braveheart color.
Yeah, sure. There's basically the main color in this, I'm going to say, is the fountains of blood that come out of people when the
how do they come out of these armor suits? Like, how are they actually? Like, they need it secure. Get a bit of duct tape.
Too tight, is what it is. The armor's cracked on too tight, so they're all pressurized. So when they get stabbed, it's like. Just
Yeah,
this
exactly.
geyser of blood that flies out of them. I really enjoy it. You folks know me. I'm a fan of violence. I like a bit of hyper violence in my movies, and this tickled that bone for me.
Tickled the fancy. Yeah, I know. I didn't mind it either. I'm not a huge violency guy. Well, no, to be honest, I kind of am. I'm not put off by gore or anything. I just don't seek it out. But I thought it worked. I thought that what they did worked in this.
Lovely. Okay, right. I forgot to do this last week. But what would you give it in terms of a rating if pushed?
Well, for Knives Out, I would give it 5. For this one, I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna give this a 4-star.
Okay,
I am. Yeah,
we're in agreement on both. I think I was really pleasantly surprised by this movie, and I think that's why I wanted to spend some time being like, how the fuck did House of Gucci make so much more money than this? Oh, also, one thing I forgot to mention that is important is that Ridley Scott literally came out and said, when people were like, oh, is everyone talking with a French accent in this movie? And he was like, no, like Matt Damon and Ben Affleck can't talk with French accents. They sound fucking ridiculous. And it's like, yes, you're right. So you get this kind of like patchwork quilt of like English, American, some French in there. But it kind of works. It doesn't ever feel ridiculous. But then why... How does the same director who has that approach to accents in this arrive at House of Gucci and be like, Jared Leto, Mamma Mia, you just keep doing that, Jared Leto, like this.
That is a really good point.
Borderline racist Italian accent that you're doing.
I think Ridley Scott is spending too long thinking about the millennials, and he should be worried about his own boomer ass.
Yeah, yeah. Oh well, yeah. Maybe actually he was sat with this having been filmed, and he watched it back a few times and was like, the millennials aren't gonna like this, and then he started making House of Gucci, and he was like, I know what we need here. What's the one thing the millennials like? That's right, Mario. We need to get the most stereotypical Italian accents in this movie we possibly can.
You know what I also love? Maybe this is a too on the nose, right? But you know what I love? I love that the message that he's giving in this film is actually a message that has been driven by millennials in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it is.
Like this change that is coming about in the world is due to maybe not millennials and maybe the next generation up. Definitely not his generation. All this time we're spending on our phones must be doing some good.
Yeah. I feel like him blaming millennials is a real you do a great job on like making this like amazing movie with a great point to it, and then you just like punch yourself in the face when you're going to the premiere or something. So it's like that you understand that this entire like drive for social change is from the generation that you're saying, well, you should get off your fucking phones and watch the movie then, shouldn't you?
Yeah.
Maybe we're too busy trying to sort this shit out in real life to watch your movies, Ridley. But yes. No, Ridley Scott, grumpy old man, but still very capable of making a good movie when it suits him. And I think that's going to do it for us, unless there's anything else.
It is my favourite movie, I'll say. Favourite movie. Last
Duel.
one.
Yes, that's right. You're saying this is your favourite movie?
2 weeks in a row. It's unprecedented. I've had the movie we've talked about is my favourite movie.
I'm going to be honest, I've got The Last Duel written down for this as well, but I can't in good conscience allow us to agree 2 weeks in a row on our favourite movie, so I'm just going to say Robin Hood Men in Tights is my favourite.
That is my favourite movie most of the time. But,
it's a good movie. It's a good movie.
It has colour too, so in some ways
it does. It has more colour than this. I'll say that much. Take note, Ridley. Maybe you should have a chat with Mel Brooks. Thank you to Nancy Wyatt and Jared Iscariot for the use of our theme song. You can find links to their stuff down in the description below. And thank you to you for watching/listening. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. We are The Culture Cave on YouTube. We're the best movie podcast ever on podcasting apps. Get involved in the comments. Let us know what you've been watching. And if you did see The Last Duel, what you thought of it. If you're one of the 3 people that saw The Last Duel in the cinema, I especially want to hear from you, because I don't know how you sort of are you on like a message board that sends around alerts when the showings start? Because
I think they could tell the future. And they knew that Ridley Scott was going to talk about it.
They're in like a Cerebro X-Men machine. They're like, and it's like, it's out! And they all run to the nearest Odeon. But aside from that, we will see you same time. That's the line. Same place next week.
Goodbye.